Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. It's Legislative Day 11. Tonight on Lawmakers, state employee furloughs are discussed as part of a short-term solution to budget woes.
And Representative Vance Smith outlines a proposed statewide transportation plan, while Senator Eric Johnson announces a bill to provide universal vouchers to students in Georgia.
And the House votes to allow the Department of Banking and Finance subpoena power over mobile check cashiers. But first, our top story tonight, Senate leadership touts possible solutions to Georgia's money problems. In an effort to make up for a $2 billion shortfall, Senate leadership wants to go another route than Governor Perdue. Furloughs across the board for state employees in administrative positions was mentioned during a press conference this morning with Senate President Pro Tem Tommy Williams and Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers. I had a chance to sit down with Senator Rogers this morning to discuss how Georgia can get out of this tumultuous financial situation.
This year, we've really worked in conjunction with the House to speed up this process and hopefully come to an agreement on the cuts. You know, many years we're worried about how we're going to spend money. This year, there's no additional spending. It's all reductions in state spending. So we'd like to be in unison with the House on where we're finding those cuts and how we can come up with the $428 million for the Homeowners Tax Relief Grant. But I will say this, while this budget is probably taking up most, or at least the lion's share of our efforts here, I think our number one priority still has got to be economic development. And if we don't do something to, in the context of state government to help get this housing industry and construction industry back up, then next year and the year after that, we're going to be back in the same situation, worrying about how we make significant cuts. So I think priority number one needs to be economic development, understanding that, of course, our only requirement while we're here is to pass that balanced budget. If the federal government ends up sending us money, that it is going to come with a whole lot of strings attached. So perhaps the best thing to do is to do our business with the money that we have. That's what we ought to be doing anyway. Balance our budget, go home. If the federal government comes through with stimulus money or so-called stimulus money, to evaluate all the strings that are attached to it, and then come back into a very quick, short special session and realize what they have given us and what we can make out of it.
Senate Democratic leader Robert Brown and Georgia's longest-serving Senator George Hooks also spoke up on the budget issue today and the possibilities of reallocating federal stimulus money during a special session. Senator Hooks begins.
Go ahead and act on the stimulus package, and we receive the money down here that we looks like we think we're going to receive, divided between the cities and counties and school boards and the state. That will, of course, take some pressure off the state budget, and we will be able to do some things, particularly in education and Medicaid, that I feel like needs to be done. That, in turn, will release the pressure valve that's on all of it. We simply don't have enough revenue coming in to meet the expenses that we budgeted.
We suggested that we come in for a special session where we would devote exclusively our attention to the budget, and we did not do that. Now we are suffering through this process. I do not think that it's appropriate to have across the board 10% cuts for every department. I think we're going to have to be more surgical than that. I think we're also going to have to look at other sources of revenue.
And in other news, a statewide transportation plan designed to move drivers more quickly through the state's most heavily congested areas was unveiled earlier today by the House Transportation Committee. Lawmakers Valerie Edwards is live at the Capitol and has more. Valerie.
And Wandy, just last week we heard from the Senate Transportation team as Committee Chair Jeff Mullis revealed his plan to help ease the state's congestion woes. Mullis once again proposed a regional T-SPLOST measure. He is, of course, trying to kickstart the momentum built in the final days of the 2008 session when just a handful of votes stood in the way of passage of the vote.
Last year, we found ourselves at the end of the session trying to get a consensus bill together. This year, we're way ahead of schedule.
The plan unveiled today by Republican Representative Vance Smith of Pine Mountain is called the 2020 Transportation Act. If the measure is passed by the General Assembly come next fall in 2010, voters will decide on a 1% statewide transportation sales tax, which will expire in 2020, hence the name. Smith's idea is a comprehensive plan, albeit a challenging one. And it's not just about moving people around the state more efficiently. It's also about moving freight in and out of centralized distribution points.
We're looking at major freight corridors for the state of Georgia. Our ports have been so important to us over the years, and we know of the growing business at the port in years to come. And there are several highways, road systems around the port area that are very important. We have the Jimmy DeLoach Parkway where it hooks on SR 21 to the port itself, Effingham Parkway to move that freight out, so that's very important. We also have in the center of the state, around Dublin, you'll see that we have Highway 441 is marked in blue. We're looking at some type transfer station right there in the center of the state. It will connect around the loop in Athens and use 316.
Representative Smith is projecting an anticipated revenue stream of up to $25 billion over the next 10 years. Here's where some of the money will go. For the 149 counties outside of the Atlanta metro area, $1 billion will go for the local assistance road programs, another $1 billion to state aid, another $1 billion to help rehab the state's crumbling bridges. $500 million will go to repave some of the state's dirt roads, and $400 million to shore up the infrastructure of some of the state's 100 regional airports. Now, if you're wondering what's the difference between the House Transportation Plan and the Senate Transportation Plan, here it is in a nutshell. The House is proposing a 1% statewide sales tax, which expires in 10 years. The Senate is proposing a 1% regional T-SPLOST, one which local jurisdictions can choose not to be a part of. Reporting live, I'm Valerie Edwards for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Valerie. Well, the T-SPLOST bill is expected to make a return to the Senate floor as soon as tomorrow. And as you just heard from Valerie, a very similar measure failed in the final moments of the session last year. So tomorrow is basically a take two for T-SPLOST. Now, if this bill passes, the people of Georgia will get to vote on a regional basis whether they want to increase their taxes by 1 penny for transportation projects. Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers says the bill is important, but there is a reason why it's not as urgent as issues like the budget.
I would say at this point, every issue except the budget could potentially be pushed back one more year. And again, regardless of what we do, it only goes on the 2010 ballot. So there is no hard deadline we have to meet. But it would be nice to pass a transportation plan so that we, as the people who are placing this on the ballot for the voters to decide, could go out and explain to people in our local communities, here's what it is, here's what it means, here's the pros, here are the cons, and let the voters be educated as to what it is they're ultimately voting on. You know, in the last election, we had 3 constitutional amendments that were on the ballot, and some people were a little concerned because of the legalese language that they didn't fully comprehend exactly what it was they were voting on. Even my own wife came to me and said, well, what is this? And only because I had the opportunity to be here during the process did I understand what was on those ballot questions. So anytime we have an extended opportunity to go out and explain constitutional amendments, it is beneficial, but we're not up against any hard deadline. So I would rather get it right than try to save additional time.
I think the urgency is, one, as you stated, is education, giving the chance for the voters to understand what's being proposed. Second of all, my concern is that this issue will get swept up into the gubernatorial race in the general election in 2010. And so far this bill has been pretty well nonpartisan, but I don't think it can last much longer.
And what kind of projects could people look forward to if a bill like this passes?
Well, obviously, road projects, as we're well aware of, redoing interchanges, and particularly here in Metro Atlanta, an investment in transit for the whole region, not just where it's been here in the immediate Atlanta area, but the whole region. So those issues are what you're going to be looking at.
Now, Senator Doug Stoney, you just heard from after Senator Rogers, is one of 3 Democrats who co-sponsored this 2-part bill. But the disagreements on this particular measure is more a House versus Senate issue than Democrat versus Republican so far.
House Majority Leader Jerry Keene last week told reporters to expect a vote Friday on House Resolution 1. It's a constitutional amendment to cap property tax increases. But to date, that measure has yet to get an up or down vote.
Have all members now voted? So the clerk will lock the machine.
Moments after the House agreed to provide property tax relief to homeowners for 1 additional year, Representative Jay Shaw presented a motion that would usually be considered out of order when one of the majority leader's bills remained on the calendar.
Mr. Speaker, I move we adjourn.
All you first-year folks out there, if y'all stand up and try to make that motion, I'm going to not recognize you for that purpose. But Mr. Shaw and I agree.
And so the House adjourned Friday without taking up H.R. 1. Today the matter was back, but still not up for a vote.
On Friday, the chair adjourned, and before I realized it, the clerk told me I should have called for sending H.R. 1 back to Rules Committee, so we left it on the calendar. Technically, it should have been moved back to Rules. Unless we agree to continue the calendar. Is there objection to sending H.R. 1 back to Rules? It'll have to get back in line like every other bill. Chair is none. H.R. 1 is back in Rules Committee.
Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle discussed last Thursday his plans to save property tax relief grants. In fact, he aims to double them. This measure is a response to Governor Perdue's plan to repeal the grants in order to help balance the budget. Now, many Democrats agree with Cagle on maintaining these grants, but believe additional measures are necessary. We begin with a clip from the Lieutenant Governor's announcement about Senate Bill 83 last Thursday.
The proposals moving forward is really trying to make sure that the property owner stays whole in the process. And we're going to cap the assessments, so that gives predictability from one year to the next. Property owners will know very clearly that their assessment will be capped, and the only way that local county governments can raise their taxes is by increasing the millage rate. So they'll have to take that vote to do so. The second piece of that is to double the homestead exemption for property owners from $2,000 to $4,000, which will give them also some additional relief on their property owner in case we're not able to continue to fund the Homeowners Tax Relief Grant into the future.
I certainly don't think that we should do away with the exemptions. I do not think that it would be in the best interest of the people of Georgia. I think we need to look at other alternatives as far as sources of monies. One of the things that we have to look at eventually, maybe not this session, but certainly very soon, is restructuring our taxes in this state as a whole. We've given too many exemptions to corporations, and as a result of that, we are running a deficit in part. If we would just eliminate the exemptions that we've given to corporations over years, we would have about $1 billion just from that. So I think we're going to have to look in a comprehensive way at taxes, but certainly not doing away with the homestead exemption is the way to go.
If you're unhappy with your child's school, one proposed bill may make it easier for you to send your child to any school in the state, public or private. Lawmakers Brittany Evans joins us live from the Capitol with that story. Brittany.
Thanks, Wandy. It's a heated debate here at the Capitol as to whether or not taxpayer money should go to funding private school tuition. Some lawmakers are saying a universal voucher program may be the key to a more successful school system. The sponsor of the bill, Senator Eric Johnson, explained.
Vouchers are not a silver bullet. They're not the only thing we need to do, but they are probably the most controversial, and they're probably the crucial part of any successful education reform.
If passed, SB 90 would allow parents to choose any school in the state, public or private, for their children to attend. For those who choose to move from a public to a private school, a $5,000 voucher would offset tuition. Senator Johnson responded today to those who are concerned about the bill's effect on public schools.
This is good for public schools. This is not an attack on public schools. In the maximum mature voucher program, about 5% of the students use them. This is not about them. Hardly anybody can argue that they don't benefit from vouchers. This is about the 95% of the children in the public school system that benefit from that competition and that accountability.
As in years past, the voucher issue is quite sensitive, and heavy opposition can be expected from lawmakers, including Democratic leader Robert Brown.
This is the worst education bill since the 1950s. A similar bill was actually introduced in the 1950s that was a response to Brown v. Board of Education, and it was rejected at that point, and I think we would do well to reject this one now.
Representative Mary Margaret Oliver said the focus should be on improving the public school system.
I don't support my tax money going to private schools. I don't support my tax money going to private schools for well-off children. I don't support my tax money going to religious-based private schools. My tax money needs to go to public schools. We need them to be better. We need them to be stronger. We need to offer parents choices that fit their child's needs.
While some states have seen failure with universal school vouchers, Senator Johnson says that Georgia's desire for change, paired with its experience with the Hope Scholarship, makes the voucher program the right option for moving forward. Reporting live, I'm Brittany Evans for Lawmakers.
Brittany, before you go, is there anything in this bill that regards admissions and transportation for students that the legislation should pass?
Yes, there is. Schools would still have to choose to admit the student, and parents would be responsible for transportation. Thus far, no special busing provisions are included.
We invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers. We invite you to visit that site and vote in our legislative issue poll. We'll bring you the results of that poll later this week.
Well, speaking of the poll, we now have the results of our second online poll for you. When asked, do you support putting the Homeowners Tax Relief Grant into the state constitution, 58% of the respondents said yes and 42% said no. Now, 26 of the people who participated in our online poll this time around, or actually a total of 26 people participated this time around. So please be sure to visit gpb.org/lawmakers so you can vote in the next one. In other news, the House today passed the measure to ensure agreement between federal and state banking regulations, but House Bill 141 also extends to the Department of Banking and Finance some new powers.
This portion of the bill gives subpoena powers to the Department of Banking and Finance. Now, that ought to make everybody's ears in here go on red alert, and if it doesn't, I hope that it will, because we should be very, very cautious when we give any state agency or department subpoena powers.
The measure gives the Department of Banking and Finance subpoena powers over companies that offer wired transfer of funds and mobile check cashing, powers the department already has over traditional banks.
Is there other language and legislation that also govern mobile check cashers?
There is other language that governs them, but basically what this does is it just treats them the same as everybody else. We're not going to treat them any different, but they're not going to be able to say because we're mobile, we don't have to abide under the Department of Banking and Finance regulations.
Representative Calvin Smyrie expressed concern about a provision that prevents banks from including intangible goodwill items in their total assets, such as the value of a bank's name. Representative Mills responded with a letter from Banking and Finance Commissioner Rob Braswell.
He says this is truly a non-event to banks and will not require any banks in Georgia to make any adjustments to their balance sheets, their lending limits, their investment limits, etc. today, and most likely will never affect any bank in the future.
House Bill 141 passed by a vote of 162 to 5 and now moves to the Senate.
Senator Vincent Fort took a point of personal privilege this morning, encouraging fellow senators to make the right decision when bills surface this year dealing with mortgage rates. He states that predatory lending measures were stalled with a bill in 2002, but that same measure was gutted in 2003, opening the door for shady loans.
Remember, in 2003, the House was what? Democratic, so there's a lot of blame to go around. But the question is, what do we do now? What do we do when foreclosures in the rural areas and in the urban areas, North Georgia, South Georgia, suburbs, are occurring at a rate unprecedented in the history of this state. What do we do now? We can point fingers and get into the blame game, but we all have to agree that something needs to be done now. There are 2 Senate bills at least that have been or will be introduced to deal with the foreclosure crisis and the subprime and prime mortgage issues. I'm sure you get the same calls that I get from homeowners who are in desperate situations. We've got to do something. Now, as we do something, as we move forward with these bills and whatever other bills get come before us, let's be careful. As you know, there are going to be folk in the lobby out there telling us what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. But these are some of the same folk that got us in this mess. These are some of the same folk that put us in the ditch. When I get out of the ditch, I don't want the same people to help me because they might not be so helpful. So when they come to you and tell you, don't do this or do this, you need to ask them a couple of questions. 1, aren't you the same guys that got us in this problem? And then 2, aren't you all the same folk that just done took billions of dollars of taxpayer money to get bailed out? Shouldn't we help, or shouldn't we bail out the homeowners that find themselves in desperate situations? I think so. So I'm just here rising on a point of personal privilege just to throw out a couple of caveats. Don't listen to the folk that got us in the problem in 2002 and 2003. Don't listen to those people. Listen to your constituents.
The House today agreed that those who advertise themselves as licensed counselors or therapists should actually hold a license from an accredited institution. Representative Mike Jacobs presents House Bill 60.
Would give the composite board, which governs those professions, enforcement power to issue a cease and desist letter or obtain an injunction for people calling themselves licensed who are not, or entities claiming to engage in licensure which cannot. The composite board has received complaints but is not able to act on them. Adding the underlying language in this bill, which is the only language that is being amended into the law, will give them the ability to pursue those complaints. I also want to explain something that I've had several questions about. The bill will not affect the ability of anyone in the various exceptions you see listed in the bill, which is what makes this bill very lengthy. All of that is existing law. It will not affect the ability of anyone in those various exceptions to engage in counseling or marriage and family therapy. For example, pastoral counselors.
HB 60 passed without dissenting vote. That measure now heads to the Senate.
Senator John Douglas from the 17th District had no opposition when he proposed a bill to the Education and Youth Committee that would prohibit sex offenders from serving on school boards.
After 10 years in Georgia, sexual predators are eligible to run for school boards, which is a job that puts them right back in the midst of our children. So Senate Bill 14 is easy. It just says that anyone who's on the National Sex Offender Registry or the state sex offender registry will not be eligible to run for or serve on a school board. And so I don't know how to make it any easier than that, Mr. Chairman, but that's the bill, and I would appreciate favorable consideration from the committee.
Aye. Those opposed? Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, the bill passed the committee with no opposition and will now move to Senate rules for consideration.
Despite a strong showing from those in opposition, Senate Bill 30 easily passed the Senate Agricultural Committee today. Senator Ross Tollison sponsored that bill and called it a simple piece of house cleaning. Senate Bill 30 would require suppliers of gasoline to offer unblended gas to distributors and dealers.
We want independents to blend. We want everybody to be able to blend to keep that supply out there to the consumer. And I think that's the important thing, to have as many people that can accomplish this to keep the supply out there to the consumer.
There's no compelling reason for the enactment of Senate Bill 30. It could cause harm to the consumer, and it cannot be justified by serving any legitimate public interest solely benefits one class of trade over another. Additionally, Senate Bill 30, first of all, represents an unwarranted and counterproductive intrusion into free markets. It conflicts with federal requirements relating to the increased use of renewable fuels. It prevents refiners from ensuring that their gasoline meets federal specifications. It increases prospects for unacceptable overblending of ethanol with gasoline. It interferes in private contracts. And number 6, it conflicts with federal trademark law.
We've come a long way since we didn't have any alternative fuels in this state. Some people didn't want the E85 pump program that we had, that we came out with. There were people that were against that. We've come a long ways in this state. We're producing ethanols in this state today, more volume than we ever had before.
Senate Bill 30 received a due pass recommendation and now heads to Senate rules. Finally tonight, you thought that there was dissension between the political parties? Well, even the groundhogs couldn't agree. Earlier this morning, Punxsutawney Phil predicted 6 more weeks of winter, while his southern counterpart, General Beauregard Lee, indicated that spring would be coming soon. So lawmakers checked in with members of the General Assembly to see when they think the session might end.
I think we were going to be getting out of the session by the end of March, but that we would be back in June.
Interesting view of what might be, but I wondered if there wasn't a more scientific approach to determining when the session will end.
Is there any animal in particular that you think might help us to determine when the session would end?
Well, you could put lipstick on a pig, but pig would be good.
I think right now it might be the possum, but I don't know what happened when he saw a shadow this morning.
Usually down in South Georgia, we have a lot of sandhill cranes coming in after, they come from, I guess, South Florida, maybe even as far as South America, making their trek north. And it's usually in March that they start coming in, so maybe that'll be a good sign anyway.
I haven't been looking for my shadow today, but we're going to have a quick session. We will be out of here quickly. For one thing, it saves money. For every additional day we stay here, it costs the taxpayers over $70,000. So the sooner we get done with our business and go home, the better.
Well, we'll see if he's right. Coming up Wednesday, we invite you to join us for a special live broadcast. Georgia Supreme Court Chief Justice Leah Ward Sears delivers her 4th State of the Judiciary address before a special joint session at 10:30 a.m. We'll be broadcasting that address live on GPB Knowledge. GPB Knowledge is available to those with digital television receivers at 0.3 of your local GPB transmitter. For example, 20.3 in Augusta or 8.3 in Atlanta. You can also watch the address online at gpb.org. That's 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday. And if you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. on GPB or 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can also keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up on GPB television, Bert Wolf Travels and Traditions. Tonight's episode features Antarctica and the Falkland Islands. That's next here on GPB.
That, of course, is our broadcast for this, the 11th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Wendy Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. for Lawmakers. Good night.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.